Jeremy here from cloudautomationguide.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how to integrate VMware Aria Automation with NSX to deploy secure multi-tier applications, complete with security groups and network policies built right into the solution. If you're looking to embed security into your automation workflows, this video is for you. Let's dive in. First and foremost, let's define what it is that we're doing. What we're going to be doing today is building a 3-tier application using an Aria Automation cloud template. And Aria Automation has been integrated with NSX, and there are components within the cloud template that are going to actually configure some pieces of NSX to be able to provide security for our application as soon as the virtual machines are deployed. So I'm going to walk you through right now some of the NSX pieces and the prerequisites, but right here, this is basically what our application architecture looks like. We have a 3-tier application. We have firewalls in between each tier, and we also have a firewall controlling access to, from the internet in. Essentially, it's not shown here, but what we're doing with this use case is we are allowing access from the internet to the web server and nothing else. The web server will be able to communicate with the application server, and the application server can communicate with the database, and that's it. One important thing to note, the NSX firewall, we're using the distributed firewall, but the gateway firewall is as well. They are stateful firewalls. So I will show you the security policies or the firewall rules. What you'll see is app can talk to, or web can talk to app, but there's no rule saying that app can talk to web. That's because it is a stateful firewall. So if web can talk to app, then app can respond. Okay, I do not currently have rules where app can talk to web. That's a little bit more, I'm just going to show you, it's really simple. You'll just see in the example that I didn't initiate that from the other way around because I don't want it to initiate the other way around. I want web to initiate communications to app to initiate communications to the database, and that's it. Not database to app and then app to web. So let's get started. First thing, let's look at NSX. So there's all these virtual machines that we're deploying are going to be built on NSX segments. So these are the 3 segments we're using: the Cloud Automation Group app, database, and web. Just basic NSX segments, nothing fancy here. And then we have to pre-build our application or security groups. We do not have any members in these security groups, but we have the app, database, and web. Aria Automation, when it deploys the virtual machines, it will populate this information. And then that all ends up flowing into our distributed firewall rules for our application. So here you have a pre-built, so just to be clear, you have to pre-create all this. You have to pre-create the segments, you have to pre-create the security groups, and you have to pre-create the policy and the firewall rules. So, and then what happens is during the deployment, Aria Automation will build the virtual machines, it'll add the virtual machines to the security groups, and then by being members of the security groups, they will inherit these policies, the security policies, and these firewall rules will be applied automatically as soon as the virtual machine is built and before it even comes online for the first time. So that's how how Aria Automation and NSX provide security out of the box. So here are the rules where I am allowing everything into my web. So from anywhere to my web security group, allow from the web security group to the app security group, and allow from the database or the app security group to the database security group. Now, one thing you'll notice over here in the apply to section is that I actually have the security groups defined. And that is especially important when you're dealing with like deny all rules. You only want these rules to apply to the virtual machines for which they're being configured. So if you were to have a accidentally, for some reason, misconfigured drop, and you applied it to the entire distributed firewall, everything attached to that distributed firewall will be affected. So just a little architectural note for you. Be sure that, especially when you're doing drop rules, but just in general, unless you need to apply it to everything that could potentially be on the distributed firewall, like for instance, allowing everything to your web server. Well, if you have a bunch of virtual machines in your infrastructure on NSX segments, instead of creating groups or a whole bunch of stuff that may be cumbersome to allow access to the web server, one, it's anything here to the web server, but you apply it to your distributed firewall. So that applies to everything. But if you have something that's more granular, like I only want to control access from the source and destination of a specific group, and I don't want that to apply inadvertently to anyone else, especially if it's a drop rule, scope it to the actual security group. And then that will help minimize any pain that you may cause yourself by a misconfigured firewall rule. So that being said, we've got the NSX segments, we have the NSX security groups, and we have the NSX security policy and firewall rules already in place. The framework's established, ready for us to go. Now we get to dive into the Aria automation side of things and start having some fun. So one of the first things, we're going to go into assembler. One of the first things that you have to do is you have to kind of pre-configure the environment. You can't just jump right into your cloud template. Uh, there's some things within the infrastructure you have to do. Specifically, when it comes to assigning virtual machines to resources, you have to have a way for Aria Automation to identify what those resources are. This is especially true in something like a multi-machine blueprint or cloud template where you are actually putting machines onto different networks. Because essentially what will happen is the virtual machines will end up being mapped to a particular cloud zone, like for instance this one for vCenter, and then everything in that cloud zone, if you do not use what's called capability tags and assign those capability tags to the resources and constraint tags within your cloud template, we'll go over those. If you don't leverage those, then it's the wild, wild west. Everything that's in the cloud zone now becomes a potential target. And so if I want to assign my application VM to the application tier network, I actually have to basically define some sort of criteria that identifies this network is for my application tier, and then on this virtual machine, I'm going to make sure that its network is the application tier network. We'll go into that, but right now I need to set up some infrastructure or show you how to set up some infrastructure so that way you can make sure that happens. So going back to this, we have our web tier VM. It's going to be connected to a web tier network, app to app tier, database to database tier. So how do we start doing that? Well, first and foremost, we have to come to network profiles. You'll see I have two network profiles created because I didn't want to bore everybody with the process of creating all three. We'll just go through one. But I do have my database network profile and my web network profile. Now think of the network profile as a container. It's a container that it links together networks, network policies, if you so choose, load balancers. It basically kind of tells how Aria, what kind of networks are going to be inside this profile and eligible for use, as well as if you are, which we're not in this use case, but if you were to leverage, say, NSX on-demand networks and on-demand security groups, it tells you kind of which tier 0 gateway are you going to use. If you want to do load balancers, which load balancers are you going to use? That goes into the network profile configuration. It also, if you're trying to assign a network to a virtual machine, in order for Aria Automation to be able to actually see the network that's eligible for assignment, that network has to be part of a network profile. So think of a network profile as kind of like an intermediary bucket, right? You want to find the pebble. There's all these pebbles on the ground, which are your networks, but the only way that you can actually choose a pebble is if it's in a bucket. That's kind of how this works. So let's go ahead and create our network profile for our application network. So you click on new, and what account is it in? All of these are being deployed to my vCenter. So I have to choose the vCenter account. I'm going to name it my application network profile. I do not necessarily need to enter a capability tag, but I could. It's not really relevant for this use case, but You can go into it later. You may have like a certain set of networks which are for dev, another set of networks which are for production, and you can use any of them. You just have to find a way to differentiate them. You would basically put on the, it's the capability tag here on the network profile, you would put it here. But for our use case, we don't have to do anything. So now we have to, which networks are going to actually be part of our application network profile. So we're going to go to add network. I'm going to filter for my NSX networks and also further filter for anything starting with CAG. Now I have my application network and we're good to go there. Now, we're not using these, but a little bit, just a little kind of primer on the offhand. If you want to do isolation policies, it's basically what type of network or security group are you using? In our case, we're using existing, and the reason for that is if you wanted to reuse the security groups that are in NSX for other deployments, you could not do on-demand security groups because on-demand networks and on-demand security groups are created specifically for that single deployment. And when you create a new deployment, a new network and a new security group gets created versus reusing the existing one. So for our use case, we are not going to do anything with the isolation policy. However, if we were, we would then have to define what tier 0 router and what edge cluster would be consumed, associated with those networks and security groups we creating. Load balancers, we're not touching load balancers for this. Security groups, this is where we have to link our security group. So it is the app security group. This kind of just links everything together for Aria Automation to be able to use it. So when the virtual machine gets deployed into this network here on this network profile, and we say you're going to be going to a security group, this is kind of how it all knows everything. So one more thing before we flip over out of here is for this, in order to be able to test everything, I have to IP all of these systems. To make it simple, I have decided to use the internal IPAM for Aria Automation, and so I have to then associate an IP range which I have already configured or had configured. So in case this is CAG app network, I'm going to associate that network with it. It's already associated because that's what I'm configuring it on. And then .1 is the NSX segments gateway. So we're going to allow it to issue out from .2 to .254. Save and close. And now we can create. I almost messed up there. So actually here on the capability tags, let me just do this. Because I remembered if you don't assign a capability tag on the network profile, when you go to assign a constraint tag for the network, it won't find the network. So yes, you do. I'll retract what I said. Yes, you do have to put a capability tag on your network profile. It just so happens that like for here, I have that capability tag, and then I guess I don't. I had tagged the networks, but this is an example of if you add the capability tag to the network profile, you don't necessarily have to add the tag to the network that's on the network profile, and it'll still deploy. However, if you were to have like, this is my AZ1 network profile, and here's all my networks in AZ1, I could have a dev, test, and production network inside that network profile. So you would have some sort of constraint tag on your virtual machine that says, I'm going to go to AZ1 network profile, and it's going to go on this network, and so here it goes. So that's how that all works. So we have our network profiles, we have our networks, we have our capability tags added. Let's go check out our security groups, because our security groups are another thing that we have to add to our cloud template, and we have to basically use a constraint tag so that way Aria Automation knows which security group we're talking about. So in that case, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add a tag. to each one of our security groups. So I'll just go ahead and reuse the same tags that I used on the network profiles. There is nothing wrong with doing that necessarily. Tags are just some arbitrary uh, kind of not arbitrary code, but it's just a tag, and it can be applied to anything, reused to anything. Unlike vSphere tags, if anybody's ever had fun with them, the tags in Aria Automation are not necessarily category specific, I guess is what I was trying to say. Because in vSphere, you can set up a tag which can only be used on an ESXi host, or a tag which can only be used on a virtual machine. Not the case here. You use this, you use it wherever you want. I just recommend that you kind of be descriptive with it if you're going to use it in multiple places on multiple resources, if you have to track that for whatever reason. All right, so we have network profiles configured with networks and IP addresses and all that good stuff. We have our security groups configured with our tags. I think we are actually ready to get started with our cloud template. So here is what one looks like, which is completed. So let's go through the process of actually building it. Start from scratch. So we're going to new, blank canvas. We're just going to call this our demo multi-tier template. I'm going to assign it to my templates project. If I want to dish it out later, I'll do that. Okay, first thing we're going to do is drag our machines, vSphere machines. We're going to do 3 of them. I know this is long. I hope you guys are dealing with me going through this. We'll get through it as quick as we can. All right, first thing we're going to do to each one is we're going to do an image and a flavor. Let's make it small since it's a lab. And for speed, let's copy and try to paste this through. All right, so we have our virtual machines with our images and sizes. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to add our NSX networks, one for each system. And I like to put my machines on top because you'll notice as you populate stuff on the canvas, stuff comes over here. And I'm a little OCD. I like to keep things in order. And it's just easiest. You'll see why a little bit. It's a little bit easier for me if I just keep the machine on top. So now we have our networks in. So now what do we have to do in order to be able to say, okay, which network is which tier? This is where the capability tags and constraint tags come in. So basically what this is saying is this network is going to be the result of, let's just make this our app. This network here is going to be the one that's associated with the CAG-app capability tag. This one is going to end up being our, let's see, I did app. Let me do web first because that's the top level that we're talking to first. And then this next one, we are going to do app, constraints, tag, app. And then this one is going to be constraints, tag, DB. Okay, so you'll notice something missing here. There's nothing connecting it. So those of you that are new to cloud templates, in order to connect the resources together, just highlight, grab the little circle, and drag it down to the resource. Then you will also take a look over here on the right. You will see that this little property on this machine pops up. This basically says, hey, this machine is now associated with this network. The network being the resource. Let me expand this, make it bigger. Sorry, y'all. So the resource dot cloud network, cloud NSX network 1, this guy. See, he's highlighted, right? or if I was to click on it here, you see it's highlighted over here. So now let's finish doing that to the rest of our tiers. Make this window a little bit bigger. All right, so now we have our virtual machines configured. They are linked to the networks. The networks are then linked, scoped to where that they will then be for the specific tier. What about the security groups? Well, security groups are now basically the cloud agnostic security group type. So we're going to drag 3 of these over. I'm going to put them right here next to my virtual machine and kind of repeat the process. So first things first, this is our web tier. How do I select the web tier? Well, you'll notice that it automatically populates a constraint section, something to be aware of. And if you go back to the article, the blog post that's associated with this video, it'll be in the description of this video. There's a link to the Aria Automation cloud assembly documentation from Broadcom. It's in there, but basically it states that if you are leveraging an existing security group, the only way you can reference that security group or identify the security group in Cloud Assembly is to use a constraints tag. If you are creating an on-demand security group, you cannot use the constraints tags because the security groups don't exist. You have to then specify a name, and the name, property, and value dictates to Aria Automation what it's going to name the security group in NSX. But for our purposes, since we're using existing, we then have to use constraint tags. And we have to make sure we choose the correct one. Otherwise, our deployment will fail. So this is our app. And this is our database. So one thing I forgot to mention is if you were to try on the network piece, so let me click back to the network real quick. If you were to try to look for a constraint tag here and it doesn't automatically pop up, what that's saying is you don't have a constraint tag or you don't have a capability tag defined on your network profile. So if you're ever doing this and these are missing or one of them is missing, go check out your network profiles and make sure it has a capability tag. Okay, second to last thing, we now need to, just because the cloud, the security group's here doesn't mean it's linked to the virtual machine because you don't see any linkage on the virtual machine. You just see the networks. You don't see a security group. So we're going to repeat, click and drag our little circle to the machine, and then it's going to ask us which NIC do you want to assign this to? Because what ends up happening is in NSX, the virtual machine itself, even though NSX supports virtual machines being added directly to security groups, this implementation of it through this method does not add the virtual machine object itself. It adds the virtual interface of the virtual machine, which is the NIC, and it also adds the IP address configured on that virtual interface. So when you drag and drop the security group, connect it to the virtual machine, it asks you which NIC do you want to add it to. And so we're going to repeat that process for our remaining 2 tiers. Oops. And there we go. So we could technically deploy this now. The problem is none of our virtual machines would be communicating on the network. Why? Well, one, the template that this is based off of is not doing DHCP, right? It's just a blank template, just got a NIC configured, haven't done anything with it. I also like to be a little bit more controlling, controlling is the wrong word, deterministic in my approaches when it comes to automation. And so most of the customers I deal with, unless you're talking desktops, we're talking servers here, so they like to do static IP addresses. So I'll show you real quick how to do static IPs in the environment. So essentially what you do is on your virtual machine, what we will do above our security group section. Notice the security groups is part of the actual network piece, and that's another reason why you have to add it to the network profile. So back to the IP thing. Sorry, got sidetracked. So in order to set an IP address, you want to make its assignment type, in this case, static. And then if we do that, we need to tell it, okay, what's my IP address? Well, you don't necessarily have to do it for this one because we're using internal IPAM. But we do need to tell the system how is it going to get on the network. In other words, what's my gateway? So there's the gateway property, but then where am I going to pull the gateway from? One thing I forgot to show you, um, I'll just show you real quick, is on each one of these networks, I have configured some information on the networks. And you'll see that here in a second as soon as I pull them up. So we're filtering again for NSX and CAG, and let's take a look at the app. So you'll see there's a CIDR here. So there's some configuration that's been done internally. For instance, I said this is what the domain name for the network, the DNS suffix is, as well as the CIDR and the gateway and DNS servers and the search domain. So when I come over here on the system, I'm needing to get it an IP address. What do? So I need to reference the network that it's attached to, and then the gateway property on that network. Voila. So when this virtual machine gets deployed, because it's a static assignment, and there is an IP address or an IP range associated with the network in the network profile, and because I have assigned this gateway property to be the value of the gateway configured on the network, the virtual machine, when it's deployed, Aria Automation will assign it an IP address from its internal IPAM from the subnet that's associated with that network, and it will assign it the IP of the gateway configured on your network resource. So we're going to repeat that process for our other two tiers. I'm going to copy paste, but what you need to do is if you do the same thing, you need to make sure that you change this to match its network. Otherwise, you're going to be pulling gateway information from the wrong network. Security group and machine there. Bam. And 3. Now, almost done. One last thing. How are we going to name these virtual machines? Right? Because as of right now, the only thing Aria Automation knows how to do is I'm going to deploy a machine from this image of that size, and I'm going to put it on this network, and I'm going to give it an IP address, and I'm going to give it that gateway IP, and I'm going to make it a member of that security group. So the way that we define names on a machine is we use a property called name. Now we have two options here. Let me get off my caps lock. One I don't like, and the other I'm going to show you. One is I can just call this my app VM, and that's what it'll name it. The other option is I'm going to actually create inputs. So mind the spacing. It is important. So 2 spaces, and I'm going to say this is app VM name. So that's the name of my input. What kind of input is it? It's a string. I did something wrong. Hold on. App VM name type string. That's what I did wrong. All right, so that's for my app VM. And then I'm going to do, let me just call it, oops, web VM name type string. And there's all sorts of stuff you could do here. Like you could set like a default value. like you say, default is this is, default name, all sorts of stuff. Uh, you set a title and then a name of the VM. And so that would actually be like the friendly name that the user sees versus web VM name, stuff like that. So play around with it, have some fun, get to know it, love it. Um, name, type, string. All right, so now we have our inputs. So when this launches, user requests it, they will be prompted to provide these three values. Um, Another thing that you would probably have to do, I don't know if you can do it in here, but at least in the service broker on custom forms, you can make inputs mandatory, so that way users actually have to provide data. So going back to, we actually have our inputs now. So how do we map those inputs from up top down to the values on the virtual machine? So you do that by $ bracket, open bracket, input, dot, and then the property name, or the input parameter name, right? So that's for our web VM. Now we have our app VM, input.app VM name. And I'm just using tab to complete all of these lines. If it pops up a menu option and I like it, I just tab across so I don't have to keep typing. And then lastly, our database is going to be our input.dbvm name. No, db, not app. dbvm name. Now we are done, right? Done. Fingers crossed. I'm going to do a version so that way whenever I go to deploy this, I will actually, use that version. You have to do that the first time, especially if you want to release it to the catalog. For this use case, I'm not actually going to release it to the catalog, but if you want to make something available to a user and you have done your initial development and you do not click version and release the catalog, no user is going to see it unless they have permissions to actually come in and look at the cloud template itself. So just in case I decide to do something on Service Broker, I will just go ahead and release this to the catalog and then we'll create, and then now we have a new version. Now, after all that, before we try to deploy, take a long time and possibly get failures, the first thing that we want to do is we want to test our template. You can test it by coming down and clicking test. Provide some information for our inputs, web, app. You can see I've done this before. And then we run test. What is this doing? It's testing our YAML syntax over in the code on the right, but it's pretty quick to let us know when something's messed up. But mostly here, it's testing Aria Automation's ability to take these virtual machines and networks and security groups and actually put them onto resources in the back end. And so we have a successful test. Yay, that's awesome. That means there's no issues from at least assigning a VM to a network and a cloud zone and compute cluster. If you wanted to see more in depth as to what was evaluated, you can click on the provisioning diagram. It will take you to a new window, or not a new window, the same window, but it'll take you into the request details. So you see that in this case, there's three main phases: allocating the network objects, allocating the security groups. In other words, are they there? Did it find it? And then allocating the machines to an actual cloud zone and compute cluster. So in the network allocation, how does it know what to allocate to? Well, here it shows us our constraint that we configured on the network. And this is for the web. If I wanted to look at all of them, I click network allocation because I have multiple networks and I can look at every single one of the networks that it was trying to allocate and see where it found it and why it found it. So for instance, the database, it has this CAG-DB constraint on it. So the first thing it does is it looks inside projects. Are there any constraints within defined at the project level that may prevent us from being able to honor this blueprint, this cloud template constraint? And there's none. So that was good. Then it goes in through and looks at the regions. Well, because I'm using vCenter, right? I'm using vSphere virtual machine uh, machines in my cloud template. The only region I have available to me is the one, the one cloud account that I have that's vCenter. If I had multiple cloud accounts, I would have to have further refining constraint tags defined in my cloud template to specify which cloud account it's going to. For instance, I've got cloud account east, vCenter east for the East Coast. If I have vCenter west for the West Coast, I'd have to have something in my cloud template that says what I'm, you know, to destine it to one. Or it's just going to pick one for the entire deployment and round robin, however, right? Provided that it has. Or maybe there's some more pieces down below, like, it's going to the dev environment. So the dev environment only exists in my East vCenter, not the West. There's all sorts of different criteria. So it found the vCenter, and then now it was looking for, I think I have a space. I do have a space. It didn't find it, but still allowed it to pass. So, but it did show me that the constraint was unmatched, but it chose the network anyways. So I need to figure out why, and because it looks like there's a space in my constraint tag name, so I have to fix that. Let me check the app and make sure. That looks like there's something not right. Ah, no, I know what it is. There's a little weird thing about Aria automation. You know how I had to define the capability tag on the network profile? Well, I don't have any capability tags on the networks. However, fortunately, the networks are the only networks in the network profiles. So it allows me to go ahead and keep moving forward. If I had multiple networks and no network profiles, I may not get the right, or no network tags, capability tags, I might not get the right one. So let me, just to make sure that everything deploys just fine, let me go into my networks and I'm going to just go ahead and add the tags to the networks themselves, and I'm going to retest. Another little piece of tidbit, if you don't want to have to keep filtering your networks, let's say you work in an environment that has a lot of networks and you've got them filtered down to a handful, but they have to have separate tags, don't click the network itself to add the tag, because it'll open up a new window, and then when you close out, your filters here will disappear. Instead, check the box, hit tags, put in your tag. This is the web tag. See, filter stayed. Because if I don't, and I do this, right, and I come down here and I enter the tag, see, now I'm in my network configuration. What am I in? DB, right? So I hit save, and now my filters are gone. And so now I got to come back up and hit NSX, and then I will do my app. All right, let's go back to our cloud template and rerun our test, take a look at the provisioning diagram, and go from there. All right. Successful again, and let's take a look at our provisioning diagram and see if we have anything different. It hasn't updated yet. It doesn't think there's any tags. That's okay, it will pass. We look at the security groups. You see the security group passed. It was looking for the CAG-web, and it passed just fine. And if we take a look at the machine allocation for each one of our machines, we don't really have anything that's targeting them to anything. Basically, it went to the project. You haven't hit any resource limits or anything like that. Um, In this, there's the flavor mapping that we chose, which is small, is available. The the image mapping is available, and there's nothing wrong with the cluster, so we're good to go there. So let's go back, and we are actually going to deploy. I'm not going to sit and make you watch through the whole deployment. Fortunately, it's not that long, but I will pause the video. But to do the deployment, all you have to do is come and hit deploy. Let's just give it a name, and we will input our things and hit deploy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and come back to you whenever it's done. So one thing I want to show you real quick while it is deploying, you'll notice that as it's deploying, it's building stuff out. So if you were to take a look at, say, the history, right, you can see exactly what's going on from start to finish. So down here, you've got the initial piece. It initializes, then it's allocating our different pieces. It's allocating the first NSX segment and security group and machine. Then it goes to the second, second, third for a third. So once all the allocations are done, in other words, this is where everything's going to go. Then it goes to what's called an approval phase. The approval phase, I don't have any approvals configured, so automatically approved. Approvals, that's another topic for discussion, but long story short, if you wanted to open up Aria Automation for users to just deploy willy-nilly, you need to implement some sort of control to make sure that they don't fill up, your underlying resources, overload your compute, storage, etc. So you would create approvals that get fired off. Once all of that takes place, the NSX and security groups created fast because, well, they're already there. They already exist. It was just a matter of saying, hey, these are what's going. Now we've got the create the actual vSphere virtual machine. So we can come over real quick into where they're being created. They're going to a specific project here, or a folder, even though I didn't actually specify a folder in the cloud template. That template's project that this cloud template is part of does have a custom property configured on it by default. I did that so that way all virtual machines would go into the templates project. So if you go into your projects folder underneath provisioning, you are able to assign custom properties to resources that get deployed for the project. And one is folder name, and the folder name property normally is, it's configured on the virtual machine object within the cloud template, but that specifies which folder in vCenter, or if it's vCenter, it'll say which folder it actually gets deployed into. One thing to note, if you're not familiar with it, if you have a name of a virtual machine folder that doesn't exist in vCenter, it will create it by default, and then it will add the virtual machines to it. So as you see, they're coming in, coming on, getting built, and they're small, so they're going pretty fast. But I'm going to pause the video again. I'm not going to bore you with the whole customizations piece, but once they come up and they have IP addresses, I will resume the video and we can get back to it. All right, we are back. The deployment completed successfully. We see all of our components. We got our IP address down here. Let's take a look at what we got going on inside. We have the network here. This web is connected to the web network, and it's got 1.3 as the IP address. This is our app VM. It is connected to the app network with a 2.2 address, and this is our database VM. It is connected to the database network, and it has a 3.2 address. So if we go inside NSX to see what was done there, we take a look at our app security group. View members, we see our 2.2 for the app. We see the segment port that the app VM is connected to, and we see the network adapter on the app VM. Okay. And if we were to take a look at the database view members, we would see similar. You have IP address, VIFs, segment port, and same thing for the web. I'm not going to bore you with that. Just to reiterate, remember that they are in these security groups. So as a result, that they are inheriting basically these firewall rules are being applied to them. So let's take a look at what I can do from the internet, so to speak. Um, the internet being my work lap or my desktop. Try to get a command prompt open here. All right, so from the command prompt, let me see if I can get to the web server. So I'm going to do ping 172.16.1. What is our web server IP again? 1.3. So I can hit 1.3. Now our app is 2.2. Can I hit 2.2? No, I cannot. And our database is 3.2. And I cannot hit it either. So that just shows that the NSX rules are applying to prevent our internet facing clients or our internet based clients from hitting anything other than our web. Let's go ahead and bounce over to our web browser. So on our web browser here, let's remember what our IPs were again. Let me get a window out of the way here. So our app VM is 2.2, database is 3.2, and our web is 1.3. So let's go from our web VM, try to hit 2.2 and 3.2. So ping 172.16.2.2. I can hit app as expected. Web should talk to app, but can it talk to database? No, it cannot. Can web get out to the internet? No, it cannot. It cannot initiate connections out to the internet. So let's check our app tier. App should talk to database and it should be able to talk to nothing else. Ping 172.16.3.2. It can hit the database. Can it hit the web? No, it cannot. And it cannot get out to the internet either. The last one is going to be our database connection. This poor soul should not be able to talk to anybody on their own. Not at least initialize it. So ping. First off, internet, no good. Cannot talk to web. And cannot hit the app server directly. So with all of that, that is the result of integrating Aria Automation and NSX and configuring your cloud template so that you can integrate with NSX security policies right off the bat. So I thank you for watching. I hope that you found this walkthrough helpful. If you did, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I promise future videos will not be as long as this. This was a complex, video. So future ones, they'll be a little bit more bite-sized, a little bit easier to ingest. But if you do like and you want to keep following, hit the subscribe button. I will be posting more Aria automation content and hands-on guides soon. And until next time, keep automating.